Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. JoBeth and Shauna ran with their skirts billowing out behind them and their hands held tightly together, afraid to look back. Shauna kept up the best she could with JoBeth, but JoBeth was possessed to run as far as possible from Mother Tomalina and Father James. She would not stop, even when her face was beet red under her bruises. Shauna was exhausted, but afraid to ask JoBeth to slow down for fear she would be sent back to the Johnstons. She knew JoBeth had not wanted to bring her. There was nowhere Shauna wanted to be other than with the strong girl running beside her. She never wanted to return from where she came. Never. Exhausted, JoBeth stopped, stumbling to her knees, dragging the equally exhausted child with her, both heaving heavily, their lungs ready to collapse. "Look!" JoBeth panted, pointing straight ahead of them. The little girl squinted, but could not see anything. Her eyes were blurry from running in the wind. She coughed, unable to catch her breath, and spat out a stream of saliva. "What is it?" It's a pond." JoBeth began to laugh oddly. She started to get up, wiping her sweaty brow with the crook of her arm. JoBeth reached down and grasped Shauna's twig-like arm, lifting the confused child to her feet. She was almost exuberant over finding a pond. Shauna could not understand this joy, as she had never known the need to be clean, having spent most of her 5 years barely bathing. Kicking off her ill-fitting shoes, JoBeth walked straight to the stream and bent first to drink the cool water. Shauna followed. Surprised at how thirsty they were, they greedily gulped water from the pond. "Have you ever tasted water so good, Shauna?" JoBeth spouted between gulps. She cupped her hands together and took large mouthfuls of water, savoring each drop as it passed her lips, the excess dribbling down her chin. "Can't say as I has," Shauna replied. JoBeth turned and smiled at the clean circle around Shauna's lips. Was that color she saw on the child's face? "You know, Shauna, it's not proper English to use words like can't. It is, I cannot say that I have," JoBeth said sternly. If she was going to be responsible for the young girl, she would not have her sounding like an uneducated hick. Shauna's lips dropped into a frown. Her dirty face was streaked with water. Embarrassed, Shauna whispered, "I'm sorry." Shauna looked down at her clean, moist palms. Red lines and calluses from long days of working in the fields glared up at her. She was no good. JoBeth would leave her behind. A painful lump began to push its way into her throat, bringing with it pesky, salty tears to fill her eyes. Shauna bit her lip and desperately tried to hold back from crying. JoBeth felt the heat rise to her cheeks, realizing she had crushed Shauna's tender feelings. She felt awful, like a bully. Couldn't she have just let her enjoy the water instead of criticizing? "No need," she corrected herself, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You will learn soon enough, probably very quickly. You seem quite intelligent. You just need proper guidance. You have never been taught. In fact, when Polly, my little brother, was 5, he did not quite have the understanding you do. So, there is nothing to be upset about." She gave Shauna the best smile she could muster. Shauna sighed with relief. JoBeth thought she was intelligent. She was not sure what that word meant, but it was obvious it was a word that pleased the older girl. The pale child grinned back at JoBeth, her hurt feelings forgotten. JoBeth stood up and reached for Shauna. "Let's go swimming and see what is under all this dirt." "I ain't never swam before." Shauna stiffened. JoBeth was going to be hard to please. "No need to worry. I will show you. but today we don't have time. We'll just clean off," she said while holding back the urge to correct Shauna's speech again. She walked into the water. The child stood on the shore, hesitant to follow. The water felt cool and refreshing. Jo Beth sank to her knees, her dress ballooning around her. She giggled out loud and encouraged Shauna to kneel down, too. It felt good to laugh again. Jo Beth couldn't remember the last time she had laughed or felt good. "Take the sand from the bottom of the pond and rub it on your skin." Jo Beth grabbed the cool, grainy floor and started to rub sand roughly on her neck and arms. She sighed and dunked her head back into the water. It tickled her ears, and she felt herself relaxing just a bit. "My pappy used to say if you didn't have soap in a tub, a pond and sand will do the job just the same." "Will it clean your hair?" Shauna asked, rubbing sand on her arms, amazed that it worked. She looked up at Jo Beth for an answer. Shauna always liked how nice her hair felt after being washed, so soft and fresh. "I don't know. I guess we could try it." Jo Beth grabbed a large handful of the muddy substance and plopped it on Shauna's head. She squealed with delight and mashed the sand into her hair. Laughing, Jo Beth plopped another handful on her head and ground it in. Like old friends, the girls began to giggle and splash each other. Warmth encased Jo Beth's tattered body. Covered in sand, she scoured harder on her arms, legs, chest, and stomach. She wanted to rub the sand between her legs to wash away the filth Father James had put there, but thought against it. She was already very sore down below. Shauna, delighted, closed her eyes and splashed the water with her tiny hands, sending beaded droplets into the air. Jo Beth, seeing her chance, quickly and gently rubbed her swollen genitals with her fingers until she was clean. She did not feel clean, but at least the proof that Father James had been there was gone. "We better rinse off." The thought of Father James sobered her. How she longed to stay in that pond, but that was impossible. They had come far that day, but not far enough. "All right." Shauna splashed water over her muddy arms. "I'll just dive underwater and get the sand out of my hair, and then I will help you with yours." In an instant, Jo Beth was down beneath the surface of the now murky water. When she resurfaced, she was still black and blue, but at least she was clean. She helped Shauna rinse her hair, and then they both got out of the pond and sat on the grass to dry off. "We should eat something to keep up our strength," Jo Beth said, combing the tangles from Shauna's clean hair with her fingers. Shauna, who had never experienced loving hands brushing her hair, basked in the glory of her newfound attention. This day would be etched in her memory forever. It was the happiest she'd ever been. She closed her eyes and smiled to herself as Jo Beth continued to detangle her hair. She had been secretly thinking of eating too, but was afraid of ruining the wonderful time and didn't dare to ask. What if Jo Beth felt she was too much of a bother or ate too much? Maybe she would not want to keep Shauna with her, so she kept quiet. A hungry belly she could deal with, but in just the short time she had spent with Jo Beth, she knew she could never be without her. "We will eat 1 carrot each and a raw cob of corn. Maybe tomorrow we will find something else to eat." Jo Beth stood and returned to the pond where their sack had been left on the shore. She grabbed 2 large carrots and cleaned them in the water. A light breeze caused her damp dress to cling. Walking quickly, Jo Beth fretted about where they should go. She could not think of anywhere in particular. Suddenly, she remembered something her father had said to her not too long ago. They were out in the buggy, looking at a fence that needed mending. Jo Beth went with her pappy because she enjoyed the ride and his conversation. She always felt so peaceful, sitting beside the father she loved so dearly. The sun began to fall behind the horizon. Polly had been standing behind them, telling tales of fighting pirates, dragons, and wizards. JoBeth laughed as Pappy declared that Polly had the most extraordinary imagination he had ever heard. "Aw, Pappy, it's all just playing," Polly said, not sure if having an imagination was a good thing or a bad thing. "Look, children," Pappy said, slowing the buggy to a stop. The horses stomped their feet in protest and snorted in disapproval. JoBeth and Polly looked where their father pointed and saw the reddish yellow of the sun slowly burning out beyond the valley. "When I had no place to go, and was in no hurry to get there, I put my sights toward the sun and let my feet carry me home," Pappy said in a faraway voice. "You talking about the old days again, Pa?" Polly asked while leaning over his shoulder, his eyes transfixed by the fiery sun. "Remember that hymn we sing in church?" Pappy asked as he turned to JoBeth. She looked at him solemnly. "How does it go again? Oh, yes. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." Pappy stared at JoBeth, making her feel that the moment was crucial, something she should remember. "Yes, Pappy, I remember it. It's Amazing Grace," JoBeth answered, gazing at the horizon. "When I had no place to go, and was in no hurry to get there, I put my sights toward the sun, and let my feet carry me home. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." Pappy's eyes were kind and warm, as his words were softly embedded in his daughter's heart. They sat silently for a few moments. Polly mouthed the phrases his father had just spoken. He looked in frustration at his father and sister. "Pappy, I don't get it. What does it mean?" "Well, it brought me to your mother." Pappy turned around and messed with Polly's hair. "But Mama didn't find you, Pappy. I still don't get it," Polly said, shooing his father's hand away. Michael Roberts looked back at JoBeth and gently took her hand in his. It felt warm and safe. "One day, you will understand. It is not for me to explain it to you," Pappy answered, still looking at JoBeth. She had the strangest feeling he was speaking only to her and not her brother. "I still don't get it," Polly said, tossing a piece of grass out of the wagon. Pappy nickered to the horses and turned toward home, humming Amazing Grace. JoBeth felt it was strange that she would remember that evening. Did Pappy know he would not be around for her when she needed his advice the most? Was Polly never to understand that night because he would never need to? JoBeth watched the dying embers of the sun on the horizon. Night, with all its darkness, would come very quickly. "When I had no place to go, and was in no hurry to get there," JoBeth said to herself. "But I am in a hurry, Pappy. I am in a really huge hurry." She clutched Shauna's hand and began walking toward the sun, singing Amazing Grace softly to herself. The night quickly rolled in, casting eerie shadows on the browning grass of fall. Shauna trembled from the chilling breeze and the scary shapes hovering above them. She squeezed JoBeth's hand tighter and looked up at her face. Was she scared also? Noticing the large, frightened eyes searching her own, JoBeth smiled uneasily at the spooked child. "They will know we are missing now," JoBeth thought. "How far have we come? Is it far enough?" She looked down at the exhausted urchin. She looked as though she would fall asleep standing up. Both of them had yet to eat supper. The poor child was probably starving. JoBeth felt ashamed again. She was going to have to start thinking about her young charge. As much as Shauna wanted JoBeth to believe she could watch out for herself, she was only 5 years old. "We won't travel tonight," JoBeth said aloud with regret. "We need all the rest we can get, so we can travel farther during the day." She wondered just where they would sleep for the evening. It all seemed so simple when she decided to leave. Only the drive to escape Father James had occupied her thoughts. Now she was dragging a 5-year-old child into her mess. JoBeth tried to read Shauna's eyes. What lurked behind those hollow dark sockets? She shivered unconsciously. "JoBeth?" Shauna whispered apprehensively. "Are we's going to sleep outside in the night?" "Of course, Shauna. Where else would we sleep?" JoBeth looked around at her surroundings. Shadows jumped like phantoms. Trees hung their leaves low to the chilled ground, reaching for fallen comrades. It was frightening, and JoBeth shuddered, clutching her sweater around her for warmth. She forced a brave smile for Shauna's sake. "I guess we could look for some sort of shelter." JoBeth did not want to admit it to herself, but she, too, was exhausted. "Just in case it rains or something." Shauna sighed with relief. The night air was chilly, but there was no sign of rain. JoBeth clasped Shauna's tiny pale hand in hers, and together they searched for a place to sleep. It was not long before they found a small, shallow cave beside a narrow pond. They could both smell the sweet, crisp air emanating from the water, and JoBeth smiled, knowing that a swim was a good prospect for the morning. "I know it looks spooky," she said, coming out of the mouth of the cave after searching it first, in case there were any 4-legged guests she didn't want to disturb. "But at least it's a roof over our heads, and we are out of the open." She persuaded Shauna into the dark cave with a stern hand on her hesitant, bony back. "I wish we could see better," Shauna said, walking beside JoBeth into the cave. JoBeth placed her arm around her companion's thin shoulders. "We will sleep together for warmth. Here, sit down." She gently pressed Shauna down into the farthest corner of the cave. It was not very large, just big enough for the two of them. "Use your sack for a pillow," JoBeth suggested as she squatted beside the child. Both sacks were quickly arranged as pillows. Shauna slowly lay down. Suddenly, JoBeth felt exhausted, and the foreign noises outside faded as she cuddled up against Shauna. Heads resting on their sacks of food, JoBeth looked at Shauna, who was already breathing in deep, rhythmic breaths. For the first time, JoBeth thought that Shauna's pale face looked peaceful. Thinking of the events that had transpired during the day caused overwhelming emotions of doom and despair to crawl up JoBeth's spine. The morning images began to rise to the surface of her conscience. It felt like a boulder was pressing against her chest, suffocating her. Trying to catch her breath, she sat up and looked around. Darkness enveloped her, making her heart bang against her scrawny rib cage. "No," she yelped. Shauna frowned, stirring in her sleep. JoBeth clutched her arms around herself and shivered. "I will not. I cannot think about it ever again. I am free now." Absently, she wiped a tear from the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. "I have more important things to worry about now." She glanced at Shauna, who was breathing evenly again. The heaviness in her chest slowly dissipated as she took a deep breath. She blew air out of her lungs, releasing all the pent-up emotions. "I have to be strong. There is Shauna to worry about now." She lay beside the slumbering child and snuggled up close to her small, warm body. JoBeth ached all over and wondered if she would ever feel normal again. "So tired," JoBeth mumbled. Overcome with exhaustion, her eyes grew heavy, and within minutes, she was asleep. She had been dreaming of Father James, naked, coming to her. Then suddenly, she was on the train, walking down the aisle to meet her parents. The baby was crying. She turned to look and noticed everyone looking at her with disgust. When she came to her parents' seats, they glanced at her with abhorrence. "Mama? Pappy? What?" What have I done?" Jo Beth was confused. Why was everyone looking so strangely? "How could you, Jo Beth?" Mama said, turning away repulsed. The back of her head was caked with blood. "How could you do this to your mother and me?" Pappy glared. "Have you no shame?" He went to place his arm on his wife's shoulder to console her, but his arm was only a mangled stump. "But Pappy—" Jo Beth looked around, confused. The woman with the screaming baby avoided her eyes, shielding her crying infant from her. Jo Beth felt a menacing breeze and went to wrap her sweater around herself. There was no sweater. She had no clothes on at all. She was standing in the aisle, naked. Red fingerprints covered her breasts and belly, descending low to her hidden mound. Moment by moment, they became redder and redder. She could hear an evil laugh coming up the aisle behind her. The laughter felt hot against her bare back. It was him. He was back again. "Jo Beth, you whore. You're mine forever. Can't you see it? My mark is all over you." "No!" Jo Beth opened her eyes to darkness, which seemed to swallow her whole. She sat up frightened, not knowing where she was. For a moment, she thought she must have died and gone to hell. Then she heard Shauna breathing beside her and remembered the day's events. Carefully, she stepped over Shauna's sleeping form and stood to go outside. The wind nipped at her scantily clad body. It seemed angry at her, trying to blow Jo Beth away for all she had done wrong in her life. She wrapped her sweater around her shoulders and gazed across the dark trees. Goosebumps rose on her legs as the wind whipped at her. There was a damp chill between her legs. Where the dampness was a stinging sensation. She touched the wet spot on the ragged dress. Tears gripped her. Suffocating fear caused Jo Beth to suddenly want to run away. Maybe if she ran, the nightmare would end. "I am safe now. I am safe now." Jo Beth heaved, trying to control the shakiness in her knees and the beating of her heart. Could her heart take any more of this emotional turmoil? She removed her dress, repeating to herself that she was safe. Once her dress was off, she repeated the process again until she stood naked in the moonlight, clutching her urine-soaked clothing. Her head hung low as she gripped her clothing to her. She sniffed the air and savagely wiped her nose with her knuckles. As she raised her tear-stained face, she was greeted by a starry night. "I will never be frightened again. I will clean these clothes, and no one will ever know what happened. Mama, Pappy, I am no longer the girl you raised, and I have disappointed you in the worst way. The thing that Father James did—" She paused, cupping her mouth, the morning's horror repeating itself in her brain over and over again, like some sick glitch in time. "It was not something I wanted. I don't know why he did it." She shook her head, squeezing her hand tighter over her mouth, fighting the clenching of her guts and the ever-growing sensation of wanting to run. "I will be strong and never again think of this, of him, any of it." Slowly, Jo Beth walked naked to the small pond. She crouched down and began to rinse her clothes by the shore. The sun rose and shone in Jo Beth's eyes, causing her to squint and shield them with her hand. She sat up, confused as to where she was. She looked down at her thin, naked body. Her bony rib cage glared fiercely up at her. The brisk morning air caused her bruised nipples to stand erect. She winced with pain. Her whole body felt as though a horse had trampled it. Embarrassed that she had fallen asleep on a rock, naked, she jumped up and snatched the clothes she had carefully laid out to dry the night before. They were still damp. The sun warmed Jo Beth's bare back. She looked longingly at the stream, and turned to the cave. There were no movements from within its dark mouth. Carefully, she put the damp clothes back on the rock. She glanced once again toward the cave and listened for Shauna. Nothing. She slipped into the cool stream, letting the water envelop her. She swam a few strokes toward the center, her beaten body relaxing in the icy water, refreshing her and making her feel reborn. JoBeth became entranced with the swim. She felt like she was being transported away from the world and the responsibilities thrust upon her. She sighed deeply and plunged under the water. Its healing powers encased her. JoBeth surfaced and reluctantly started swimming toward the shore. She would have to wake Shauna and start on their way soon. Even though they had yet to be caught, they were still in danger. People would still be looking for them, and with the seed of freedom now planted in her, she would rather die than return to the prison she had just escaped. She stood up, placing her foot solidly on the sand bed beneath her. Then, kneading water out of her eyes, she turned to face the cave. Shauna stumbled frantically from the cave, fuzzy from sleep and, if possible, paler than ever. The poor girl looked terrified. "Shauna!" JoBeth called out, an arm protectively covering her bosom. Shauna whirled around. JoBeth looked like an angel submerged to her waist in water, arms modestly covering her front. Tears flowed from Shauna's eyes. But when she saw JoBeth, relief flooded her completely. "What on earth is wrong?" JoBeth questioned. Embarrassed, she quickly came out of the water and hastily dressed. "I thought you left me," Shauna said, bowing her head. She couldn't help noticing the teeth marks on JoBeth's breasts and the fingerprints covering every inch of her body. She didn't need to guess what had happened. It was a scene Shauna knew well. She felt sorry for her, but at least she was alive. The ordeal had not killed her, as it had Donna. Beads of water dripped down JoBeth's face. Her dress, which had finally dried thanks to the sun, clung to her wet body. JoBeth wondered again if color ever entered Shauna's face. She smiled weakly at the ghostly child and grabbed her hand. Shauna placed her waxen palm meekly in JoBeth's and gazed up with anguish into the older girl's face. No child should ever have that look, she thought. No child should be this frightened. We are together now. It's you and me, from now on. You don't have to worry about me leaving you behind. I won't do that to you, Shauna. You must believe me. Can you stand being with me all the time? JoBeth maintained her composure, trying to sound strong. Shauna beamed. I don't want to be with anyone else.